It's time to get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody had a good lunch. I did. I enjoyed that lentil soup. That was good. So it's good to see everybody. And we have Barbara back with us this afternoon for another wonderful 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it takes. And so now let's have prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we ask you to be with us this afternoon. Guide and bless Barbara as she brings your health message to us. Be with each person here that we get the word you have us get. In Jesus' name, amen. I have a couple of announcements, mainly about the being able to watch this on YouTube. So if you want to watch it, go to North Valley Adventist Church on YouTube. Make sure you see a little round picture of our church there, and that's the one, because there's one out in Virginia, and sometimes that one will come up because it's bigger than we are. So you need to make sure you're on the right one, and then go to live on there, Live. Go to live. That will put up all of her classes. So go to live, and I will put them all on a playlist next week. This week they're just all there, but I'll get a playlist so they're all in one place. So be looking for that if they disappear. Look on the playlist. Yes. I'm going to make CDs, yeah. You can sign up for them back there. I mean DVDs. You want CDs? We're going to do DVDs. We can also do CDs. So just let us know. You sign up for DVDs because they cost money. CDs are free. $34 a set for the whole week. Yeah. And now, if we can please everyone turn off their cell phone or turn the sound down, one of the two. But please, so we don't interrupt everything. Okay? Thank you. Now we'll turn it over to Barbara.
Thank you. I trust everyone's revived. That was a nice break. We're going to be looking at the immune system now. And the immune system is a very misunderstood system. And it might surprise you to know exactly what your immune system is. And if we look at the body, we see that there are areas of defense in the body. And the skin is probably the first line of defense. If you break your skin, I think everyone knows you've got to cover that skin, you've got to cover it, you've got to do something, because now it's exposed. There's nothing to protect. And as we'll see, especially in our next lecture where we look at microorganisms, they're everywhere. And so whenever you've got a break in the skin, it needs to be covered, it needs to be sealed, it needs to be protected until the skin grows again. So the skin is your front line of your immune system. But let's go to the head, and we find that there are 7 holes. There are 2 ears, there are 2 eyes, there are 2 nostrils, and there's a mouth. And in the ears, there is an eardrum, and that eardrum is a protection from the internal environment. There are hairs, there's also earwax, so there's different systems in place to keep those ears clear. And then we go to the eyes, and the eye is an incredible design because you've got those bones there that will prevent something from going in the eye. But if it's small enough not to be held back by those bony structures, then there's eyelashes. And the blinking process, it keeps many things out of the eye. But if something gets through those defenses, then surrounding the eye is like a mucus or a fluid. And so that also can kill a bug that might get into the eye, and we all know that you make your eye go round the world, and you can often flick it out. So there's a whole lot of systems in place in the eye. Then we go to the nose, and the nose has got hairs in it. The nose has like little caverns in it. So if we breathe in pure air, because it's light, it goes straight back into the trachea and down into the lungs. But if air has any dust on it, it becomes a little heavier and it drops and it ricochets around the little caverns in the nose until that dust is shaken off the air becomes light, and then it goes back down into the lungs. And if something happens to get into the lungs, then we've got those little hairs there that can often trap it. And another reason, after listening about the nose before, the importance of breathing through the nose and not breathing through the mouth, because the mouth has no defenses in there to protect the lungs. So it must be nose. And then we come to the mouth, and the mouth again was designed not to breathe, but we are very glad when we've got a bad cold and the nose is very blocked up that we can get some breaths through the mouth. But ideally it's predominantly the nose. So in the mouth, that is predominantly where the food goes, and the food gets chewed and it's taken down through the cardiac sphincter, which is a little valve here, and into the stomach. Now in the stomach there's a line of defense, and it's called hydrochloric acid. And in my book Self-Heal by Design, I've got a chapter called The Stomach's Secret Weapon, and it's hydrochloric acid. And as you will see when we go through the gastrointestinal tract, looking at digestion and looking at where and what is digested, you'll see that hydrochloric acid plays a very important role in the digestion of protein. But another area that a lot of people are not familiar with is that hydrochloric acid is very strong antimicrobial. It's antibacterial, it's anti-yeast, antifungal. That's your hydrochloric acid. So if you happen to eat food that has some bacteria or yeast on it, and of course these microorganisms cannot be seen, so you can't see it, and it gets into the stomach, hydrochloric acid will kill it. Dogs have 10 times the hydrochloric acid that humans have, and they eat things that would probably kill us because that strong hydrochloric acid basically wipes it out. So that's the front line of our immune system, considering the gastrointestinal tract. Now let's say hydrochloric acid levels are low. Why would they be low? They would be low if a person's drinking with their meals, because water dilutes acid. We remember that from science. So the best time to drink water is between meals. So stop half an hour before and then resume maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours after the meal. If you sit to the meal well hydrated, you will not need to drink water for quite a while after your meal. What also can exhaust hydrochloric acid is eating all day long, lots of little meals. What can also deplete hydrochloric acid is eating the largest meal at the end of the day. See, when the sun goes down, our body knows all body systems slow down when the sun goes down, including digestion. So the habit of eating a very light breakfast and lunch and eating the biggest meal at the end of the day, that exhausts hydrochloric acid. So at a time when the stomach's hoping it can go to sleep, the heaviest meal is put in there. Another thing that can exhaust or deplete hydrochloric acid is stress, anxiety. That's why no controversial issues are to be discussed at the meal table. Keep that till later. Just kills that hydrochloric acid. Coming down the gastrointestinal tract, we come to another line of defense. So lining the small intestine are what's called villi. And these villi Up in the middle of them have a lacteal, that's part of the lymphatic system, and that lymphatic system is considered the body's vacuum cleaner. It sweeps away waste from the tissues, and all through that little villi is your blood capillary network. Anything that goes into our gastrointestinal tract is not part of you or me till it gets out of the gut and into the blood. And that's where our next line of defense is. It's a thick wall. In fact, one writer called it a thick turf wall covering the villi. And that thick turf wall is made up of yeasts and bacteria. In fact, probably the most permanent bacteria is Lactobacillus acidophilus bifidobacterium. When we were in our mother's wombs, our gut was sterile. And when we were born, we were literally showered with our mother's microorganisms. I was watching a documentary on the gut flora, and they were interviewing an obstetrician. And he said, we always thought God made a mistake when he put the birth canal and the anus so close. In fact, 50 years ago, if a woman went in to have a baby, she was given an enema. They give an enema to try and clear out that colon, because when the birth canal stretches, so does the colon. This obstetrician said, we now know it's a perfect design because when the baby's born and the air touches the skin and the baby takes its first breath, it's breathing in the air from the next canal, the anus, which is where the gut flora basically is coming out. Notice what he said, perfect design. They found that babies born via caesarean section have more skin flora in their gut than gut flora. Also, in the first 3 days before the mother's milk comes in her breasts are a thick creamy substance called colostrum, and that is also rich in gut flora. That's why it's so important that a mother not have antibiotics in her pregnancy, and ideally before she even falls pregnant, that she ensures that she has good gut flora, because compromised gut flora in the mother will give compromised gut flora to the baby. And if the mother has good gut flora, then the baby will have a nice complement of gut flora. And that gut flora is very important for a few reasons. That gut flora is responsible for the final breakdown of our food. That gut flora is responsible for the absorption of the nutrients out of the gut and into the blood. But it's the third function that I want to target in this lecture, and that is protection. It's another part of our immune system. It's where the protection is. So you see, this gut flora protects the blood and the lymph from any harmful pathogens that might be in the gut. So that gut flora plays an important part in our protection, and it also is where our immune system is built from. The fourth role it plays is nourishment of the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. And traditionally, just about every country that I've looked at traditionally had some sort of cultured food as part of their traditional diet. So all through Europe, sauerkraut is popular, and the sauerkraut is the cultured cabbage, and as the cabbage is cultured, it gives off the lactobacillus. Yogurt, kefir, and through Asia, miso, and also tofus, cultured foods like that. And even when I was in Fiji, they said traditionally they used to grate cassava, wrap it up in banana leaves, and put it in the sea with a big stone on top. Being in that salt water, it would naturally culture. and including cultured foods in our dietary program ensures good gut flora. What would kill off gut flora? Antibiotics do an excellent job of killing off the gut flora. One writer said, taking an antibiotic is like dropping an atomic bomb in the gut. What did the atomic bomb kill? Good and the bad alike. That's what antibiotics do. They don't pick and choose. They just kill a lot. So they knock off gut flora. Also, your statin drugs. These are your cholesterol-lowering medications. As you'll discover when we look at the heart, that there is no proof that cholesterol causes heart disease. That's shocking news, isn't it? When you consider what we've been told. It's damage to the arterial walls that is the number one cause of heart disease and strokes. So what else? So the statin drugs, all your cholesterol-lowering medication, long-term painkiller use also knocks off the gut flora. Your refined sugar, also being a pure acid, knocks it back. So what's happening now is that body now has a compromise in the breakdown of their food, a compromise in the absorption of the food. But what we're looking at in this lection in our immune system, we've got a compromise in the protection. There's a break in the immune system line, the protective line in our body. And of course the little cells that line the gut aren't getting the nourishment that they should be getting. Now let's say the person's low in hydrochloric acid, so they've lost that defense. Let's say they're also low in good gut flora. Now, do you know there's another name for that? You've probably heard of leaky gut. Do you ever wonder what leaky gut means? It's another term that's thrown out that a lot of people don't realise. And not only have you got a leak in that gut flora, but the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract, they rely on that gut flora to be fed and to nourish. So you've also got a compromise even in the lining of the gut, not only the protective wall that coats over it. So let's say the pathogenic bacteria has survived the hydrochloric acid, they've survived this protection here, and now they're in the blood. Well, there's another system there, which probably is what most people recognise or know as their immune system, and it's the white blood cells. So white blood cells, we've got neutrophils, and neutrophils are probably the white blood cell that is in the most amount. So we'll give it a figure of approximately 60%. 66% of our white blood cells is neutrophils. Then we've got monocytes, and the monocytes take up about 20%. And then lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are the white blood cell that's made in the lymph nodes. That's 10%. And then we've got eosinophils. And eosinophils make up about 2%, and basophils. Basophils also take up about 2%. So there's our white blood cell count. The lymphocytes are what's called the scouts. They're the ones that roam around looking for any problems, and then they communicate with the neutrophils, basically saying we've got a problem over here, we've got a problem over here, and then the neutrophils come. So let's say someone's got a wound and it starts to get swollen and pussy. You know, the pus is dead, neutrophils. So the lymphocytes have said, well, there's a problem over here, and the white blood cells come to clean up. And that's why if someone's a smoker, they're often coughing up yellow lumps. The yellow lumps are the dead neutrophils. They're there basically it's your immune system. And what they give off is hydrogen peroxide. So if they surround like a pathogen in the blood, they give off hydrogen peroxide, which actually kills it. And that neutrophil basically gives its life and sloughs off. So that's basically what pus is. So if someone has a pussy area in their body, the question we have to ask is why? Well, what's happened here? So I'm going to give you an illustration. When I was in New Zealand a few years ago, I was consulting with a lady, and she brought a little son who was 7, and I noticed that his finger was twice the size. So I said, what's happening with the finger? And it was all red with like a yellow top, like a volcano, a big mountain there before it erupted. And they said, we've been to the doctor and it's cellulitis. And I said, well, yeah, we can see that. You know what cellulitis is? Inflammation of the cell. Yes, that's what we've got. But I said, what have you been doing? And she said, well, he's on his 2nd course of antibiotics. He's been on antibiotics for 10 days. This little 7-year-old boy was taking painkillers and sleeping tablets to help him sleep. And I said, yes, but something must have happened. You see, you got to dig deep. She said, well, he had a blister and he was playing in the dirt with his matchbox cars and the blister broke. Well, we know what happened now. His front line of defence is gone, which is his skin, and the dirt gets in there. And what happens now is that there's a whole line of defence that rushes to that area to protect the body from any harmful pathogens that we actually don't want in the blood. And what happens is the white blood cells come, and then the lymphatic system has more fluid there, and that's the swelling, and that can constrict the blood vessels to try and stop anything dangerous going to the body. It's quite an amazing process. I said to her, can I try something? She said, please. So what I did, I got 2 cups, and in 1 cup I put hot water. You see, when you put the body, any part of the body, into hot, you've got immediately stimulation. And we know when we have a hot shower, the body tingles, doesn't it? Especially if you're a little bit cold. There's an initial stimulation. But it's not long after the stimulation stage where there's a slowing down. That's when it's lovely and relaxing. Is that right? There's an initial stimulation and then a relaxing. But with the hot, it takes 3 minutes to get from stimulation to slowing down. That's the hot water. So I had a cup with hot water. And then I had another cup with cold. And the reason I've got the cold is you've got something else happening there. When you put the finger into the cold water, it stimulates. Absolutely it stimulates. And that's the reaction. See, we're warm-blooded creatures. So whenever cold water touches, we all know there's a, isn't there, there's a reaction. And that's what it is, it's a reaction. It's as if the body's saying, quick, cold has hit us, move fast. It's a reaction. And it only takes 30 seconds to get from stimulation stage to the slowing down stage. And that's why so many died when the Titanic went down. They were in this freezing cold water and their whole body just slowed down and stopped. It's hypothermia. And because the body knows that, there's a reaction as soon as the cold water touches. So what we're doing here is we're trying to catch the stimulation stage of hot and the stimulation of cold. And what we're stimulating is blood. Leviticus 17:11 says the life of the flesh is in the blood. So I want to show you why the blood is the life of the flesh. So blood, number 1, contains red blood cells, and the red blood cells carry the oxygen. The red blood cells carry the nutrients. the red blood cells are also carrying the water. And the red blood cells do another important function, and that's carry away waste. So anytime you need healing in a part of the body, all you need is blood. All you need is more blood. And this alternating hot and cold is the most powerful way to stimulate blood to that area. But as we've just looked at, the red blood cells are only one part of the blood. Another part of the blood is the white blood cells. And the white blood cells are basically your internal army. So I got him to put his good finger into the hot cup. And he smiled, that was good. So I said, now put your sore finger in. Ooh. So what I did was I put a little bit more cold in it until he was happy with that. Because I knew that after he'd been in the cold, he could handle it a little bit hotter. So you've got to work with the person. Got to work with what they're happy with. After 3 minutes in the hot, we went to the cold. How long in the cold? 30 seconds. While his finger is in the cold, I put a little bit of boiling water into the hot to bring it up. He's watching me, so I said, put your good finger in. Okay, yeah. I said, your sore finger will handle it better now. It's been in the cold. And he put it in after 30 seconds, and his finger was a lot happier with that. After 3 minutes, you see what we're doing is we're catching the stimulation before the slowing down happens. Because what we're stimulating is more oxygen, more nutrition, more water, more ability to carry away waste, and more white blood cells. See, what happens in an injury, the blood tends to sit or pool in that area, and you want to move it. You want to move the old out, and you want to move the fresh in. But something else is happening when we're doing the hot and colds, even to the finger. The bone marrow is being stimulated to make more white blood cells. By the time his finger was in the third, so 3 times we did this, 3 times. And by the time his finger was going into the third cold, a big smile came to that little boy's face. Why is he smiling? He's got relief. How long did that take? You done the maths on that? What are we looking at? 10, 11 minutes? How quick does it take Tylenol to work? Half an hour? 40 minutes? Painkiller? This is quicker than the painkiller. This is quicker. This is more effective, and there's no damage of the kidneys. There's no damage on the liver like there is with the drugs. It's powerful. It's a very powerful treatment, and it's been used for centuries in the area of pain relief. And in the area of pain relief, it's almost without equal. It's so quick. So this little boy had a big smile on his face. He's been suffering for 10 days. And after a very simple treatment of 2 cups, using hot and cold water, this little boy got relief. So he's just looking at his mum. He's got this body language, tells you a lot, doesn't it? And then I grated some potato. We'll look at that tomorrow afternoon. Put it in a little poultice. I'll show you how to do that tomorrow. And wrapped it on his finger, covered it with a bit of plastic to insulate it, keep it from chilling, and then wrapped it on, and then asked God to bless that little treatment. You know, the rest of the afternoon while I'm talking to his mother, he's just sitting there looking at me, smiling the whole time. He had relief. He had relief. The lady said to me when they got home, this is 11 o'clock in the morning, when they got home at 2 o'clock, he said to his mother, can we do that again? Now, why did he say that? It brought him relief. He's not better, but this is where you listen. The verse in the Bible, it's found in, and I think we mentioned it last night, in Exodus 15. I think it's Exodus or Genesis. 15:26, if you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God. What was the voice of God telling him in his body? Do this again. And that's what you listen for. You listen for what your body responds to. So when you're looking at someone, and the best person to look at first is yourself, when there's a health problem, you put the detective hat on. First of all, you look at history. Then you look at symptoms. Because what symptoms are your body saying, excuse me, can you help me here? And then you watch response. Because your body's response is your best guide. Your body's response will say, no, don't do that again. Your body's response will say, that was good. You see what you're looking for? That's how you be your own doctor, because no one knows how you feel or how it reacts. So they did it again, I think at 2, and then they took the poultice off, a fresh one on each time. And every time they changed it, the finger was going down more and more. So by the time he went to bed that night, they'd done another hot and colds, they'd done another grated potato. That little boy slept all night. The best sleep he'd had in 10 days. No painkillers, no sleeping tablets. And when he woke up in the morning and they took it off, it all came out. And the wound was clean. The wound was clean. Now, do I have to tell that mother or that son what to do with that finger now? No. You just watch. Obviously, we're going to keep it covered. They now know not to play with matchbox cars in the dirt when you've got an open wound. But it had pulled it all out, and the blood coming to the area was what was healing it. And so as you can see, you've got to supply the best quality oxygen going in through your nose. You've got to supply the best nutrition by the food that we're eating. You've got to supply water. We've got to keep hydration. So these things need to be supplied so that your body is able to maintain your immune system. It has been said that when a person has a course of antibiotics, they should be on a probiotic for at least 3 months. That's supplementing with a probiotic, and then absolutely some sort of cultured food in their diet to maintain it. It can take 6 months to totally restore that gut flora after the antibiotic. I'm not talking about emergency medicine here, I'm talking about day to day. And did you know that in Australia, in a lot of doctors' surgeries, they've got a sign there from the World Health Organization saying that the greatest healthcare risk today is the overuse of antibiotics. Doctors have been told, please reduce. Please don't be prescribing them so much, because we're getting a problem now when people are getting really sick. The antibiotics aren't touching them because they've become immune to it. And 80% of the antibiotics that are made are given to animals. So when people are eating a lot of animal products, they're getting the effect of those antibiotics in their body. So what is the best way to boost the immune system? Now that we've defined what the immune system is, what is the best way to boost it? And there's a wonderful little way that you can sustain your immune system. And here I have listed it up here. When the sunshine hits the skin, it stimulates blood movement, and that can boost your immune system. Water. The most powerful way to boost your immune system is to finish every hot shower with cold. Just a moment's silence for you to digest that. I've got some good news. If you're not used to ending your hot shower with cold, you can do it briefly. In fact, it's not cold enough unless you go, ooh, that's cold. What you can do is you can make it a little bit hotter before you go into the cold. at Misty Mountain, every morning I run up and down hills, then I dive in the mountain stream. And we live in the middle of Australia, so we have hot summers and cold winters. We have frost on the ground in the winter. So in the winter it's cold, but I'm not in there long in the winter. I'm in and out. That's one of the best ways to boost your immune system. How simple is that? So at Misty Mountain Health Retreat, we have a little steam sauna down by the creek. You don't call it a creek, stream. Yep. And our guests go into the hot steam for maybe 10 minutes till they get really hot, and then they run out and dive in the mountain stream and then back into the sauna, and usually do that 3 times. So that's almost like hot and cold to the whole body. See, water can be used in 3 ways. As a liquid, which is water. It can be used as a solid, which is your ice. And it can be used as a gas, which is steam. And this morning we talked about the steam for sinuses, and then the steam sauna that we have that heats the body up. So what we're creating in the steam sauna is a fever. And a fever gives a dramatic boost to your immune system. Now, when I trained as a nurse, we were taught if someone's got a fever, you've got to get rid of that fever as quickly as possible. All the nurses nod their heads. But fever has a purpose. And remember this, 3 things about fever. Fever is your friend. God designed fevers for a purpose. What's the purpose? To boost your immune system. And also to kill off any harmful pathogens that might be in your body. That high heat does it. There's only one part of the body that does not like getting really hot. The brain. So how do we ensure that the brain's not getting too hot? Keep well hydrated. So this is the second, I should say. We're not up to third. Water. What water does is puts the fire out. So water can be used externally and it can be used internally. So if a person's dehydrated, the best way to hydrate them is just a mouthful every few minutes. Just a mouthful, just another mouthful, just another mouthful. And before every glass, a very small crystal of the Celtic salt. The Celtic salt has 82 minerals in it. And in those 82 minerals, there are 3 magnesiums. There's magnesium sulfate, magnesium bromide, and magnesium chloride. They're the 3 magnesiums that are in the Celtic salt. Magnesium is a water-hungry molecule. That's why Celtic salt is often wet, especially in rainy weather. But if that magnesium sulfate that's in the Celtic salt, when it's in the mouth and the mucous membranes absorb it, the blood takes it to the cell, we drink water, and the water's taken inside the cell. It's the quickest way to hydrate a body. So little by little by little by little, get them to drink water. What if they're vomiting and they've got a high fever and they can't take any water? Well, the next best thing is put water in somewhere else, which is an enema. You can hydrate a person like that. You can put 2 cups of water in via the colon and the person can be hydrated very quickly. So water puts the fire out. You've got to get that water in some way. Now, some people, they don't have an enema kit and they might be a bit uncomfortable about doing it. So the other way is to lay the person in a bath. If a person's dehydrated, the skin will take the water in. So just laying them in a bath can be good. And if they're vomiting, even just to get them to hold the water in their mouth. Cold water? Well, probably if they've got a fever, I never put them in cold water because that can seal it can seal the pores. And I find that when someone's got a high fever, the problem is the body can't get rid of the heat quick enough. So you put them in a tepid bath. That's not hot and it's not cold. To someone with a fever, it'll feel cool. Pardon? Sorry, I didn't understand. And so when a person has a fever and they're very, very hot, that water will feel a bit cool, but it won't be as uncomfortable as cold water would be. So you put them in the bath. When you take them out of the bath, the water in the bath will be a bit hotter than when they went in, because that's one of the amazing properties of water, is its ability to hold hot and cold. So it'll draw the heat out of the body, and the body will also absorb some of the water. So these are ways that I learnt. When my children were young, we lived an hour from town, right up in the rainforest. So it's very handy. In fact, it's important and sometimes can save a life if you know these simple things that you can do yourself at home. And I also know in the middle of the COVID crisis, and I don't believe that the COVID was ever a crisis, I believe that the reaction was the crisis, that in some hospitals you could not go in unless you were vaccinated. Is that going to happen again? Quite possibly. So I think it's vital that we know these simple things that we can do at home. And remember, use God's LSD, long, slow, deep, to remain calm. Long, slow, deep through the nose helps you to remain calm. So water puts the fire out. So we're talking about water in and also water out. There's a few things that you can do with water to get a fever down. Now, whenever my children had a fever, I didn't do anything. I just thought, great, they got a fever. Now, my babies were breastfed till they were probably 2.5. My last baby, I breastfed him till 3. And whenever they're sick, they're upset and they want comfort. And when they want comfort, they want to feed. And I let them feed whenever they wanted when they were sick, because it meant lots of fluid going into them. And another fluid that you can try if a baby's bottle fed is coconut water. In Fiji, they call it Beauchamp, B-U, Beauchamp. And traditionally, many mothers, if they couldn't breastfeed, they would give their babies the green or the immature coconut juice to the babies. The babies thrived on it. And it's slightly sweet, and it has a lot of minerals in it. So that's also something that we just got to get those fluids in. Sucking on ice, it's whatever to get that fluid in. If your brain is well hydrated, it will not convulse with a fever. So if a child convulses with a fever, it's usually because of dehydration. So keeping well hydrated is essential. But by the way, do you know that brain damage doesn't happen with convulsions, but so many parents panic because it is scary to see a little one convulse. But if you can just keep calm and put them in a bath of tepid water, not hot, no cold. Remember that the skin, if that body's dehydrated and you place the body in water, it'll take in water that way. The skin is an amazing thing. It absorbs things, it throws off things, throws off waste, and it also breathes. That's what the skin does. You might leave them in for 10 minutes. You'd also, if it's a child and they're starting to get a little bit upset, maybe just 10 minutes. But just sponging them down too, if they're too upset to leave you and they don't want to go in a bath, you could just have a bowl of water and just sponge limb by limb and dry it, then sponge it. Just the water on there will help to bring the heat out. But one of the most effective ways to bring a fever down is a wet sheet pack. So how you do a wet sheet pack is this: you can only use wool. Can't be any of those other pretend, those pretend blankets they've got now, those fluffy things. No, it must be wool. Must be wool. So you put a woolen blanket over a bed or a massage table, and then you dip a sheet in water and wring it out, and then lay that wet sheet over, and then the person lies on that, and ideally with as little clothes as possible, maybe just underwear, and then it will not be comfortable. Even if you make the water warm, by the time you've spread it out, it's gone cold. So you lay them on it, and then they put their arms up, and you do very quickly, you wrap the sheet around their body and between their legs, get them to put their arms down, legs together, and then wrap that sheet over the rest of the body like that. And in that way, every surface of the body is being touched by the wet sheet. Then very quickly put the woolen blanket over. As soon as the woolen blanket's on them, there's no discomfort. But what you'll find, within 10 minutes, you put your hand down in there and that sheet will be hot. Where's the heat come from? The body. And what you'll find is the temperature of the body has come down. So that wet sheet pulls the water out of the body. You have to do it very quickly. If they just laid in the wet sheet, they'd chill. But the blanket quickly put over them. And often the person's temperature comes down enough, and sometimes they fall asleep in the wet sheet pack. One lady told me that her baby had a fever and she couldn't put the baby in the bath. She couldn't put, because the baby just didn't want to be in the bath and it'd cry. And she'd heard about this, so she got a little, the little wraps, the little cotton wraps that they wrap babies in. She wet it. She put it down, she quickly wrapped the baby, put a little woolly shawl around it. The baby screamed when the wet sheet went on, but as soon as she put the woolen blanket on and pulled the baby close, the baby stopped crying like that. So now she could cuddle her baby, but the baby was having the wet sheet pack the whole time. So that's how water puts the fire out. And the third one is, when all the rubbish is burnt up, the fire will go out. That's what you've got to remember, because fever has a purpose. It's a friend. So, we'll call it trash, shall we? I'm here in America. You call it trash. So when all the trash is burnt up, the fire goes out. You've got to let it run its course. When trash is burnt, then the fire goes out. So I'll give you a story to illustrate. I had a man from Romania email me, my baby's got a fever. We're so worried, so we gave the baby, in Australia they give aspirin or Panadol. Here, what do they give? Tylenol? To get the fever down? Ibuprofen or Tylenol. So when that had worn off, then the fever came back. So they did this about 3 times, and every time the drug wore off, the fever had come back. They said, "What do we do?" And I said, "You got to let the fever run its course." You see that? If it hasn't finished its job, guess what? It's going to come back. It has a purpose. So that's what you've got to remember. It has a purpose. There is a reason for a fever. So I said, just keep the baby cool, maybe a tepid bath, maybe sponge them, make sure they're well hydrated. It will pass. The baby was teething, and it's not uncommon that a baby might get a fever when they're teething. Anyway, he emailed me 24 hours later. He said, "Wow, it worked." The fever's gone down. So I gave birth to 6 babies. They all had a fever at some time or other, and that's the other thing I say to mothers when they say, "My baby's got a fever." I said, "Yes, perfectly normal. Every baby in the whole wide world has had a fever. It's all right, has a purpose." Keep the baby hydrated. Don't panic. You know what's important to do? Whenever a child is sick, you must smile. Because when that baby sees you worried, guess what the baby thinks? This must be terrible, what's happening to me. Smile. Smile. And God's LSD, long, slow, deep. Nose breaths. It will pass. And I mention the fever now because so many people are afraid of fevers. So at Misty Mountain Health Retreat, when our guests have their steam every afternoon, what are we creating? A fever. We're creating a fever. In fact, probably by the third steam, they're up to 40 degrees Celsius. I think that's around 100, 102. 102. So that's what we're creating. And you know what I never did? I never took the baby's temperature. I never took a child's temperature. I never took my temperature. Why? I can feel it's hot. And when I had COVID, January 2021, I had a fever, I think it was nearly 3 days, and I just lied there saying, thank you, Father. This is great. This is going to really fix me, this fever. So I drank a lot of water. I had a couple of showers a day, and I read and slept, and I just let my body do what it was designed to do. I had no fear, but I had a thankful heart that God has given me a body that works. And if it's not working, what happened to my why? If it's not working, you've got to put the detective hat on. Because God said in 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, he said, I have not given you the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Understanding what a fever is. All through Europe, sanitariums have created fevers over the last few thousand years to treat various illnesses. In fact, I know that there's a health retreat in Colorado. It's called Eden Valley. They do cancer programs, I think, every month. And part of the cancer programs are fever baths, creating the fever. So you never need to fear a fever. I laid there when I had my fever. I don't think I'd had a fever for about 15 years. And I lay there thinking, this is going to do wonders for my immune system. Now, you've probably heard people say, oh, my immune system must be down. I just got a cold. No, it's because your immune system is working well that you got the cold. Because a cold is a house clean. And if you didn't need to get a cold, if you didn't need to have a house clean, you wouldn't have got one. Have you noticed when the cold goes round, some get it, some don't? The ones that get it are the ones that are ready to get it. So when I came down with COVID, I just said, okay, my body needs a house clean. I'll submit, I'll surrender. And I'll just lie on nature's operating table. That was my bed. And I let the body do what it was designed to do. But I did my part by resting. I did my part by not overloading my body with food. I did my part by keeping well hydrated. That's all I did. Because I knew that I lived in a body that worked. And you have probably read the people that go down with COVID are the one with pre-existing health conditions. As my husband says, no one dies of old age anymore. So I trust your eyes have been opened as to what your immune system is, how you can boost it, how you can give your body the right conditions so that your immune system is running very well. And one of the problems with antibiotics, not only does it slaughter your gut flora, but it really has a devastating effect on your immune system. If our body was designed to heal itself, then what makes the most sense to me is to understand what those healing processes are, to work with them. That's what natural medicine does. It works with the healing powers that have already been put in the body by God to heal us. As we transition over to our next lecture, are there any questions? Oh yeah. I think we've got a lady who's going to get a roving mic. Is it on? But I'll take questions, I'll repeat them, yes?
But what we do if the fever doesn't give up like for 10 days?
If the fever doesn't give up for 10 days, praise God. Next question. Now, if the fever's still going for 10 days, it's got a lot of rubbish to burn up, but probably probably within a couple of days, you might start to supplement with juices and soups and light foods for nourishment.
You mentioned coconut water instead of mother's milk. Instead of mother's milk in...
No, I think mother's milk is the best, but
Right.
probably I'm looking at bottle-fed babies. Instead of being given the milk when they've got a fever, they're probably better to take the coconut water.
And if they are breastfed, should we
Yeah,
add
well,
coconut water or just the
No,
milk?
I just
milk.
put my babies on the breast. That's all they wanted
Okay. But-
because they were
okay.
upset and it settled them.
Thank you.
Could you tap on a little bit on autoimmune disorders?
Autoimmune disease is very interesting. Do you know that God didn't make the body to eat itself? Something's happened. Something's happened. Why? Dr. John Clark, he's an American doctor, and he maintains that the poisons that are in the childhood vaccines are manifesting themselves as autoimmune diseases when the person is in their 30s, 40s. So you see, something's come into the body to cause this. It could be vaccines, it could be chemicals, it could be poisons, it could be molds. There's a whole lot of things that have come in that are causing this turnaround. And what are some autoimmune diseases? Crohn's disease is considered an autoimmune disease. We've seen people totally heal from that. And what are people mostly told? That there's no cure from autoimmune diseases? I don't believe that. I believe that we live in a body that when it's given the right conditions, it can heal. So in every case of, say, Crohn's disease, it's important to look at the history because you'll find different factors in every case. And sometimes the drugs come in too early and then every drug has a side effect. Your cortisones and your steroids, they're nasty drugs. And then your chemotherapy drugs, these drugs all have serious side effects, and those side effects can be contributing to autoimmune diseases. Yes?
Yeah, I have two autoimmune diseases, Hashimoto's and celiac. I have two autoimmune diseases, Hashimoto's and celiac, and my functional medicine doctor told me to be careful about getting cleaned out too rapidly and not to try and boost my immune system because then my immune system is already overactive and it'll just cause it to do more damage.
Well, an overactive immune system is basically inflammation.
Okay.
So it's getting that immune system down. And isn't it interesting that before the hybridization of wheat, there was no celiac? So it's really the chemicals and the foods that people are eating now that are contributing to this. Yeah.
Is Celtic salt the same as Himalaya pink salt?
No, it's not. Celtic salt is a hand-harvested salt from the Celtic Sea, and it has 82 minerals, whereas Himalayan salt has 75 minerals. And there's been some question marks about the Himalayan salt today and where it's sourced from, and there are claims that it does contain lead and mercury, so but I do know that Himalayan salt is cheaper and Himalayan salt is more freely available. But personally, I like the Celtic salt.
Did Dr. John Clark write a specific article or book on the vaccines causing autoimmune problems?
Is there a specific article?
Or book by Dr. John Clark?
If you Google Dr. John Clark, you'll see presentations from him where he looks at that. It is very difficult to get any research of this because, as you can imagine, the pharmaceutical companies, the medical industry don't want you to know that. But to me, it just makes sense that when chemicals are put into the body, there's going to be a reaction. And sometimes children react severely to vaccines. Sometimes there's no apparent reaction, but that reaction can manifest itself in 20 or 30 years.
Do you, is kombucha a cultured food that would be approved?
Yes, that is kombucha, yeah.
when my husband and I were traveling and he was working, one day on the trip he got a fever. We were staying in a hotel, and I had years ago taken a class from Thomas Jackson, I think, and he had talked about hydrotherapy. I think it might have been at this church, but I'm not sure. But anyway, I said, you know, the pharmacies are all closed when he got the fever. He had to be up like by 6 or 7 the next day to go make a delivery. And I said, well, we're going to do a fever treatment. I said, never done it before, but I think this is what you do. So there was 2 beds, so I took the bed sheet off of one. I stuck it in cold or ice water. I can't remember which one I used. I took the shower curtain down and put it on the bed. I laid him on the sheet. I wrapped the sheet, wet sheet around him and the shower curtain, and then I covered him up with the blankets. And the next morning he woke up, his fever was gone, he made the delivery, and it works. The other thing I wanted to say is people don't get a fever or a headache because they didn't take enough Tylenol or aspirin or Advil that day, and they don't get diarrhea because they didn't take enough Imodium that day.
That's right. That's absolutely right. It's absolutely right. It's, I think a lot of people rush to the hospital or emergency or doctors because of fear. That's why knowledge is power.
What can be done for a person that has developed rheumatoid arthritis after taking the COVID vaccine?
Oh yes, that's very difficult. We're seeing all sorts of problems arising since the vaccine, and it's interesting that we are such different people that, you know, people react in different ways. That's why you can never be absolute on the cause of various diseases. Being an inflammatory disease, you would have a look at reducing the inflammation going into the body, and turmeric. Turmeric is an excellent herb that has an anti-inflammatory effect. So it's just watching what the body responds to. The juice, carrot, celery and apple, that's 80% carrot, 10% celery, 10% apple. Very alkalizing juice. A couple of those could be taken a day.
2 short questions. How would you treat H. pylori?
Helicobacter pylori. Do you know?
How would you treat H. pylori without antibiotics?
How would you take it?
Treat.
Do you know everyone's got it? Everyone's got Helicobacter pylori. It's a naturally occurring bacteria in the gut. It only gets out of control if the conditions are right. What would be the conditions that would be right for or perfect for Helicobacter pylori to get out of control? If the person's dehydrated and they don't have a thick mucosal lining on their stomach, then it's very easy for the acid to burn holes in the stomach, and as the acid burns the holes, the Helicobacter pylori now starts to clean up the waste from the damage from the acid. And so the doctor comes in with the antibiotics, kills the Helicobacter pylori, but because the damage is still in the stomach, then the next lot of Helicobacter pylori come along. So that's what's never asked. Why? Why is that out of control in the body? And it's usually out of control in the body because of dehydration, because of poor diet, because of poor eating habits, and because of low hydrochloric acid. If the hydrochloric acid's strong, it will keep Helicobacter pylori under control.
And I have very low white blood cells.
Okay, if you've got low white blood cells, it's time to have cold showers after every hot.
Okay, thank you.
No one will ask that question again.
So I guess my question is about iodine. I see that they're adding it to salt. I thought...
Oh, well, let me tell you something interesting about iodine. And you can get this from Dr. David Brownstein's book, Iodine, Why You Need It and Why You Can't Live Without It. When the waves of the sea crash, the iodine goes into suspension, goes in the air and settles on the ground. And that's why foods grown on the coast have the highest iodine content. When you buy iodized salt, it's got sodium, chloride iodine. And when you open it and it's exposed to air, the iodine's gone within an hour. So there's no iodine in Celtic salt. There is no iodine in Himalayan salt, because when it's exposed to air, it dissipates.
So I also have Hashimoto's, celiac, and fibromyalgia. And I have been free of gluten for 7 years, and I eat almost no refined sugar. Do you think that eliminating the other
Absolutely
will
Yep.
actually heal these?
Well, people say, but I have gluten-free oats, but I have organic oats. I say it's still got lectins. And those lectins are what get the inflammation up. And there are a few things we'll be talking about the thyroid a little bit when we talk about hormones. So hormones. Tomorrow we're looking at fantastic fats. And diabetes and weight loss at 3, and natural treatments in the home at 4. It's on Wednesday morning we're going to be looking at hormones. And then in the afternoon, cancer and chronic fatigue. But what I'd like to talk about, any more questions before we move on? What we're going to talk about now is microorganisms. These are very misunderstood. And I have to tell you, they're everywhere, they're everywhere. They're on every surface area, they're on my skin. There are 10 times more microorganisms in my body than cells. Does that mean we're more plant than animal? But actually, microorganisms, they hardly have their own classification. Not plant, they're not animal. Microorganisms are everywhere. And there are 10 times more microorganisms in the gastrointestinal tract than anywhere else in the body. And when the body's running well, these microorganisms, they play a very important role. But whenever cell damage happens, these microorganisms change roles. These microorganisms now become the cleanup team, or as one microbiologist said to me, Barbara, we call them the garbage collectors. Now, I'm here in the US, so I'd better put your correct term, trash, is that right? We don't say trash. They're the trash collectors. That's what they do, that's their name. They're just opportunist organisms, so whenever there's damage, they quickly change roles to become the collectors of the waste. Their name is bacteria. That's what bacteria is, and that's what it does. In fact, the more damage, the more bacteria. That's what it is, and that's what it does. As the environment changes, they change. As the environment changes, they now become the exterminators. So what's the exterminator's name? Their name is yeast. Their name is fungus. And you might be surprised and you might be not surprised that the other name is virus. If you have a look at the characteristics of yeast and fungus and virus, they all have the same characteristics. They need a host. That's why a virus can't live on there, because it needs a host. And you know what they've been doing with COVID? Everything's getting sanitized, is that right? I don't sanitize anything. And when they offer me something to sanitize, I say, no thank you. I do wash my hands. As the environment changes, so do the microbes. They now become the undertakers. So what do the undertakers do? They take away dead things, yeah? And so this stage is mold. That's what mold is. That's what it does. And then it's not long after the mold stage that matter, it's not long after the mold stage that matter is now brought back to dust. What I have drawn for you here is the carbon cycle. It's the cycle of life. And a basic law of science states nothing's created and nothing's destroyed. It just changes form. It's the carbon cycle. And if it wasn't for these microbes, there'd be so much rubbish or trash on the planet, you wouldn't be able to walk on the planet. That's what they were designed to do, is bring matter back to dust. And what does the preacher say at the funeral? Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. He's referring to what's going to happen in the coffin. The matter, the dead body, is going to be brought back to dust. Florence Nightingale knew this. And in 1854, she was asked to go to Scutari. Let me show you why. Here's the Black Sea. Here's Crimea, and the Crimean War was happening. Nothing's new, is it? With the Crimean War, the British and the French were fighting the Russians, and the wounded were put in boats and taken down to Scutari. And Scutari, there was ex-army barracks that had been converted into a hospital. And a war correspondent went over to report on the war effort, and when he came back, he wrote this damning article. He said, "Did we raise our young men to rot in this hospital?" Because that's what they were. Death rate in the hospital is 50%. So very quickly, Florence and her nurses were sent over, 35 nurses. When they arrived, the doctor said, "You're not coming in here. This is men's business." It was filthy. There was raw sewage in the corridors. So Florence quickly, I nearly said email, telegrammed her father, and she said, "I need a shipload of clean linen, clean bandages, a cook." Their food was big vats of water with bits of rotten meat in it. In fact, when you look at the conditions, I'm surprised that the death rate wasn't 80%. In fact, they had a better chance on the battlefront than they had in this hospital. And then another shipload of wounded came in, 1,200 wounded men. The hospital was already overflowing, so that's when the doctors said to Florence and her nurses, "All right, you can come in." But meanwhile, she also telegrammed the British government and said, "We need a sanitary commission. We need a group of men to assess what's going on here, because it's horrific." And what they found was that the hospital was built in a swamp. And they found a dead horse in the swamp, and they found a dead dog in the swamp, and the men were drinking that water. So very quickly, the Sanitary Commission contracted men to get rid of the dead dog, the dead horse, to drain, to get the plumbing right, to start boiling the water. Florence made the doctors wash their hands between operations, and within 2 months, the death rate went from 50% to 2%. That's why it's important to remember Florence Nightingale, and I don't think the pharmaceutical companies will ever allow a movie to be made of her. It was quite remarkable what she did. So when she returned home 14 months later, she was hailed as a heroine, and she saw the welcoming party. She saw Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, so she changed her name to Mary Smith and went down the back gangplank and went home. And they said to her later, "Why did you do that?" She said, "I'm not a heroine." She said, "All I did was increase hygiene, sanitation and nutrition." Hygiene is personal hygiene. Keep the body clean, in and out. Wash it every day, because we're constantly throwing off waste. She found a soldier that was still in his battle clothes 10 days after he'd been admitted to the hospital. She said, "All I did was increase hygiene. Sanitation is keep the house clean." In fact, in her book, Notes on Nursing, What It Is and What It Is Not, she said the animal refuse has to be washed off the sick room walls every 2 weeks. What's the animal refuse? Everything that's coming out of a sick person is toxic. It's filthy. And she also said disease is a process of repair. It's a process of repair, she said, not necessarily accompanied by suffering. If the patient's suffering, it's the nurse's fault for not implementing the sustain me. She called these simple laws the laws of nursing. She said, never should the sick person be out of the sun. She said, fresh water to clean them, fresh water to drink. Early to bed. Sick people need to sleep longer. Trust in God, in this amazing body, that it will heal itself when we trust Him. Abstain. There are some things that must not be taken into the body if you want healing. Nose breathing. She said, never should the window be shut in a sick room. And I don't know about here, but in hospitals in Australia, you can't even open the window. No. Nutrition, the body cannot heal if it's not getting enough nourishment. Everything should be done in moderation. Exercise. I'm so glad that today the physiotherapists get people walking within 24 hours of having an operation, don't they? Some people complain, but it's actually the best thing. Start moving that body. Start moving it. Start small. She said the patient only suffers if the nurse is not implementing those basic laws. They're the true healers. And they're cheap, aren't they? And they're within reach of every single person. She went on to have huge reforms in Indian hospitals. And when she read of Louis Pasteur's theory that germs cause disease, she said, this is the theory of a man of a very unstable mind. And she said, and anyone who believes it is equally unstable. She said, germs don't cause disease, they're the result. So if any of these are out of control, why are they out of control? And often, like the little boy with his finger, he needed help. The body needed help, and that's one of the beauties of those hot and cold treatments. We had a man come, it was only a month or so ago, actually probably 6 weeks ago, and he had prostate cancer. He was in his 70s. His legs were swollen, his ankles were swollen, his stomach was bloated, he could hardly eat a thing. He was getting up at night to go to the bathroom every half an hour. He was a mess. So you know what we did? We gave him sitz baths. We sat him in hot water for 3 minutes, ice cold. In fact, everyone on the property was freezing water in their fridges for 30 seconds, hot and cold 3 times. That night, he only got up twice. How simple is that? Flood the area with fresh blood, more nutrition, more nutrients, more oxygen. Waste is being taken away. His swelling went down. And on Wednesday, when he was eating, he had seconds. Now, when he came on Sunday, he couldn't even eat the meal. Now, he's not better yet, but what's his body just saying to him? Thank you. This is what I need. You look at the history. The symptoms are where you start. And then you look at body's response. And he certainly responded. 3 days later, he was a mess again. I went and saw him and I said, did you have your sitz baths? No, I didn't. No, I didn't feel like having this. You know, the more serious the illness, the more serious steps you've got to take. And it's not forever. It's just until you start to get the body in a situation where it starts to work. How long will that take? I don't know. We've got a saying in Australia, how long's a piece of string? It can be this long or that long. Or it can be long enough to go around the world. So it all depends. In every case, it's very different. That's why you're the doctor. Let me give you a few illustrations of this. We've got an apple tree. And on the apple tree, the little apple blossoms are just starting under the action of microorganisms. And then an apple develops under the action of microorganisms. But the apple is not ready to eat. It must ripen. How does it ripen? Under the action of the same microorganisms. They change roles depending on the environment. No one eats the apple, so what happens to the apple? It rots under the action of the same microorganisms. They change roles according to the environment. We change roles according to the environment. It was very difficult for me a month ago to pack because it was 33 degrees at home. It was very hot, that's Celsius. And I had to pack all my winter woolies. I'm not dressed now the way I'm dressed when it's 33 degrees Celsius. We change roles. I'm not dressed now the way I was dressed on my morning walk. I walked very fast, I found a park, and I even found a lake. I'm not dressed now the way I'm dressed when I'm digging in my garden. I'm not dressed now the way I'm dressed when I go to a wedding. We change roles according to the environment. So do the microbes. They change roles according to the environment. And when we look at cancer, I'm going to show you how we create a condition in the body where cancer can't survive. It's the same with these microbes. They'll only live where they're getting well fed. What do they feed on? A lot of waste, heavy metals, chemicals. That's why getting those out of the body is important. Let me give you another illustration. Mother hen is sitting on 10 eggs. I pick up an egg and I shake it violently. And I put it back under mother hen. I think it takes 21 days before they all start breaking out. So I come back after 21 days, I see little chickens. I'm looking for the egg that I shook. I can't find it. And I see that mother hen has booted it out of the nest. Why? Because a bad smell started to come. Have you noticed when the bacteria, yeast and fungus, the molds are active, there's a bad smell. So there is another use for the nose other than breathing in and out is smell. Smell is a signal. Smell says, "Ooh, not going to go there." It's like a lady who wanted to show me her basement, and I went to go in and I said, "Sorry, I cannot go in there." I could smell the mold straight away. I tell you, mold can get into your body, but it's not going to be quick to get out. So mother hen has booted this egg out of the nest. Why? Had a bad smell. What did I do to egg? Now remember, it's a sealed unit. Nothing went in. When I shook it, I caused massive cell damage. And so the microorganisms that would have been contributing to the building up of little chicken now had to take their suit of clothes off, so to speak, put their rubber gloves and apron on and become the clean-up team. As the environment changed, they now became the exterminators. As the environment changed, the undertakers, till eventually egg was brought back to dust. These are the performers in the cycle of life. These are the players in the cycle of life. That's their role. That's what they do. So if they're out of control, we've got to ask, why? Why? Notice with the COVID virus, it was people with pre-existing health conditions that went down. You see, there was something already happening there. And quite possibly, the virus was just the piece of straw that tipped the scales. Very misunderstood. So no wonder Florence Nightingale said, that Louis Pasteur's theory is the theory of a very unstable mind. It makes no sense at all. But about the same time as Louis Pasteur, there was a scientist named Antoine Beauchamp, another Frenchman. 6 times professor, this man, but hardly anyone's heard of him because his theory was not popular. He said disease is born in us and of us. That's not very popular, is it? Disease is born in us and of us. Whereas Pasteur said, you poor thing, a germ has jumped on you and made you sick. So this COVID theory is a false theory. And that's why some go down and some don't, because the ones that go down are the ones that are ready for a house clean. They are ready for what Florence Nightingale said, for a process of repair. Yes? Yes, Pasteur on his deathbed, he refuted his theory. The question was, didn't Pasteur refute his theory on his deathbed? And he did. I have 3 books that quote his deathbed confession. He said Bernard was right. Bernard was a contemporary, and he believed, as Beauchamp did, that germs don't cause disease. They're the result of unhealthful conditions. So Louis Pasteur said Bernard was right. The microbe is nothing. Do you know what that means? The COVID virus is nothing. The bacteria is nothing. He said it's the terrain, or the body, the condition of the body. So let me give you an illustration, and I give this illustration in my book. It's the story of Sick Steve and Healthy Harry. Sick Steve, he drinks too much alcohol, smokes too many cigarettes, doesn't eat any greens, it takes too long to chew them. Whereas his brother, Healthy Harry, he's a landscape gardener, he's a surfer on the weekend, very healthy, has green smoothies and lentils, and he won't go down the pub, we call it the pub, for a drink. In fact, you know what he says? Sick Steve says to Healthy Harry, you're taking all the fun out of life. I want to assess fun in a minute. One day, Cousin Colin visits and he's got a bad cold. We could call it COVID, couldn't we? And he sneezes. Have you seen what happens when someone sneezes? And these little microbes that came out of him, because they're all busy house cleaning, they jumped on Sick Steve, and when they jumped on Sick Steve, they said, yippee, feast in this body. Because they're opportunist organisms, they're just going to clean up waste. And because Sick Steve smokes so much, there's a lot of damage in his lungs, and so these microbes take the opportunity to start chomping, cleaning up. Healthy Harry walks into the room. Hi, mate, as we say in Australia. Sneeze. Sorry, mate. Do you like it when people sneeze all over you, then say sorry? They jump on Healthy Harry, but there's nothing to eat. So by the end of the day, Sick Steve is really sick. You know what he says? That rotten cousin, he's given me his wog or his bug. Isn't that what we say? But he coughed on Healthy Harry and there's nothing happening there. Have you noticed? Some get it, some don't. If some gets it, because they're ready to get it. Now let's go back. Let's say Healthy Harry's just been on a surfing holiday to Hawaii, breathed in a lot of plane fumes, couldn't drink as much water as he likes, the food wasn't as good as usual, and a little bit of damage in there. And so when Cousin Colin coughs on him, the microbes go, oh, not much to eat, but there's a bit here. So by the end of the day, he's got a sore throat. And what Healthy Harry does is he calls in the SWAT team. He goes to the gym, he has a workout, he has a hot steam, dives in the cool pool, back in the hot steam or the cold shower, gives hot and colds, wonderful boost to his immune system, creating a fever. He decides not to eat tea that night, or we call it supper. He just makes himself a flu bomb. Remember I mentioned it this morning, and I'll show you the recipe tomorrow. It's garlic and ginger and cayenne pepper and eucalyptus oil and a lemon and honey. It's quite a brew. Takes a dose of that, goes to bed, piles the blankets on to create a fever, and he has a fever that night. He perspires through the night. Wakes up in the morning feeling not too bad. And he went to bed with chopped onion wrapped on his feet. He'd really called in the SWAT team. He has a few glasses of water over the next half hour, thanks God for this wonderful body he's been given, puts his joggers on and goes for a big run. Up and down the hills, does a lot of LSD, long, slow, deep, through the nose. He's trained himself well, comes back, has more water, then he has a hot and cold shower, goes to work. Oh, he has his antibiotic sandwich first, sourdough bread. Wasn't that beautiful sourdough bread at lunchtime? That's the simple needs bread. Simple needs bread, olive oil, whole crushed clove of garlic over each slice. So that's 2 full whole garlics. It's the best antibiotic. Puts avocado and tomato on top. That really helps to calm it down. And he goes to work. No one comes near him that day. He said, "It's all right, guys. If I didn't smell like this, I probably wouldn't be here." Let's have a look at Sick Steve on the other hand. Sick Steve wakes up in the morning feeling terrible, groaning about his rotten cousin that's given him his wog, can't go to work, goes to his favourite doctor. Not every doctor's like this, but he loves this doctor. This doctor never asks uncomfortable questions like, "How much are you smoking now? How much water are you drinking?" He never asks him those uncomfortable questions. He just gets his stethoscope out, has a listen, and he goes, "Oh, there's a party going on in there." What's the party? These guys are out of control. There's so much food. What's the food? It's waste. Here, take this antibiotic. Let's have a look at the antibiotic. Actually, we'll finish the story, then we'll have a look at what an antibiotic is. Take this antibiotic, Steve. Thanks, Doc. You're a great doc, you know. Not every doctor is like that. There are some great plumbers, not so good plumbers. There's some very good painters, not so good painters. It's the same in every profession. I have some very good friends that are doctors and they're great. So this one wasn't great. He took the antibiotic. Over a few days he started to feel better, but you know, he's still having his Jack Daniels at night and still smoking a lot of cigarettes and not eating well. This happens several times every year. After about 10 years, he starts coughing up blood. He has a test. He finds out he's got lung cancer. Sick Steve says, "Why did God do this to me?" Did God do that to him? Remember what Antoine Beauchamp said? "Disease is born innocent of us." But I do recognise many people are sick through ignorance. They don't realise that what they are doing is creating the disease. Well, I don't think we do. I think it's on Thursday. We look at cancer. And when we look at cancer, I'm going to show what we did to Sick Steve. Wednesday we look at cancer causes and its treatments. So what is an antibiotic? Anti means against. Biotic means life. And if we're living organisms, we have to get away from the kill mentality. I acknowledge that in a crisis, an antibiotic can save a life. But let me show you how they were discovered. 1929, Alexander Fleming is growing bacteria in flasks in his laboratory. He comes in one morning and all the bacteria is dead. And he knew Newton's third law of motion. To every action, there's an equal and an opposite reaction. Why is his bacteria dead? He began to look around. Nothing in the laboratory could have done it, but there was an open window near the flasks. The sun was coming in, and he noticed there was a dust on the sun's rays. So he searched this out, and on the next story, there was an open window with a plate of fruit, and in the plate of fruit was a mouldy orange. Remember the story from school days? And that mould dust was coming down, settling on his bacteria and killing it. So what Alexander did, he called the mould penicillium. We're going to look at fun in a minute. We will get back to fun. He called the mould penicillium. And he called the mould waste. The mould waste is more toxic than the mould. He called the mould waste penicillic acid. And that penicillic acid is the penicillin that we know today. Penicillin has saved the lives of probably millions now, granted. It has, it is, and it will. But the problem today is the overuse of the penicillin. I believe that it should be kept only for life-saving. The human body can cope with about 2 courses in a lifetime. Did you hear that? One lady told me that her daughter had 22 courses in the first year of life. Ooh, that hurt to hear that. I wonder if her gut will ever recover. In fact, I almost think that's verging on criminal. And what's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. One man said to me, I was on antibiotics for 7 years for acne. Let's find out why the acne's there, rather than just knocking it out. How many people have an antibiotic and then they have thrush? Thrush in the mouth, vaginal thrush, anal thrush. Because what have they just taken? They've just taken a mold waste. So they tested hundreds of different mold wastes, and 80% of them were so deadly they killed the rats they tested them on. So penicillin is not deadly enough to kill you outright. But anything that can kill a small organism has the potential to kill a large, and what are we? We're the large. And that's why I love Florence Nightingale's story. Look at the success she got 80 years before antibiotics. She just cleaned it up so there was nothing for these opportunist organisms to do. They weren't active there because it was all clean. It cleaned it up. And the little boy's finger in the last lecture, we just cleaned it up. How do we clean it up? We use the body's own processes to clean it up. That's why understanding how the body works, understanding the cycle of life, the carbon cycle, understanding how it works, is paramount in understanding how the body works and how the body heals. So when people ask my husband, who has a political party in Australia campaigning for free choice and protesting against the rights that have been taken away from us under the guise of safety. My grandfather was a light horseman. You've heard of the light horseman? It was an amazing part of the First World War. These light horsemen, Australian young men on horses, they were feared because they were fearless. So my grandfather went to war with a total disregard for his safety to fight for my freedoms. How would he feel today to know that those freedoms that he fought for are being taken away from me under the guise of safety? We have documentaries, we have movies about people that have stood for truth despite being slandered, being tortured, and yet stood. And yet we're doing the very same thing to those people today. The people that stand firm. And that's why I believe we all should be our own doctors. Part of being our own doctors is understanding this. Fun is feeling good every day of your life and being able to climb mountains with your grandchildren. Isn't that true fun? So when I was visiting my grandchildren and my daughter in Tasmania, they said, Nana, we want to take you on the zip line up in the treetops. I said, great. And so there was the lady who's just gone into her 70th year, zip lining with all the teenagers. And that's fun. Isn't that fun, living in a body that still works? So we have to implement everything that will sustain me so that I can be sustained. That's fun. And how many people in society today, the last 20 years of their life, they're living in a body that doesn't work, doesn't move properly. And God never meant it to be that way. And as Florence Nightingale said, disease doesn't happen overnight. It's often weeks, months, years in the making. So let me tell you about an experiment that Antoine Beauchamp did. He got a dead cat. He wrapped it in an airtight container, opened it 4 months later, dust. Now in Australia, I'll give you an illustration of what happens in Australia. If a cat dies in the bush in Australia, the crows have a peck, the kookaburras have a peck, the dingoes will have a nibble, the blowflies lay the maggots, the dung beetles and the worms come up. They're all the scavengers. But in Antoine Beauchamp's dead cat, he put it in an airtight container, no blowflies, no worms, no maggots, no vultures. So after 4 months when he opened it, what had brought cat back to dust? The microorganisms that were an integral part of living, running cat. And death is the ultimate cell damage. That's why the Bible says in Genesis 3:19 that we come from dust, we go back to dust, we're dust. And this morning I gave you that beautiful verse, it's Genesis 2:7, and the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his, not mouth, nostrils, the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So what happened with Antoine Beauchamp's cat is now that it was dead, the ultimate cell damage is death, so the microorganisms now changed roles and became the cleanup team, became the exterminators, eventually the undertakers, until they'd brought matter back to dust. With great excitement, Antoine Beauchamp got the dust. He put it under a microscope. It was alive with microorganisms. A basic law of science states nothing's created, nothing's destroyed. It just changes form. And now those microorganisms play another role. And this is why, when I'm gardening, I never put another crop in the ground unless I've put compost in. So this is a plant in my garden. Here are the roots. So when I put compost into my soil, I'm putting in microorganisms, because that's what compost is. The microorganisms in the weeds, in the scraps from the garden, they're full of microorganisms that now bring the matter back to dust. So I put the compost in my soil, and now these microorganisms are responsible for the breakdown of the minerals in the soil. Aren't you glad we don't have to eat dirt? We couldn't access any minerals out of it anyway. It's the microorganisms that break down the minerals in the soil and make them available for the roots of the plant. These microorganisms are responsible for the absorption of the minerals out of the soil and into the plant. These microorganisms protect the plant against harmful pathogens. These microorganisms also nourish the plant. And the plant knows that it needs those microorganisms. So 50% of the fuel that it makes from photosynthesis, it sends back down to the roots to feed the microbes. Beautiful illustration of the law of service that's written on every plant. Every plant takes for one purpose: to give. It basically says to the microorganism, stay, we'll feed you well. Because that plant knows it needs them to access the minerals in the soil, to protect and to nourish. Now I'm going to bring your minds back to the last lecture. They look just like the roots of a plant, but they're the villi that line our gastrointestinal tract. And that healthy or friendly gut flora, it's called our microbiome, that's covering our villi. It's responsible for the final breakdown, for the absorption, for the protection, and for the nourishment. It's all about the microbes. That's why we have to get away from this kill mentality. Don't kill the microbes, find out why they're there. Work with them, as Florence Nightingale did. We don't need to fear the microbes. To date, they have tested 1.5 million different molds, yeasts, and funguses. My husband, who's my biggest critic, and I'm so glad because if I pass him, I'll pass anyone. He said, I don't believe you. I said, check me out. He came back and he said, 5 million. They've documented 5 million different yeasts, molds, and funguses. Some of them cause disease in man, some of them not so much. But there's a book called The China Study by Dr. Colin Campbell. You might have heard of this book. He was called to go to the Philippines because children were dying of liver cancer between 8 and 10 years of age. And as he investigated, he found the cause. The cause was peanut butter. You see, peanuts grow in the ground. And when they're stored, they are often contaminated with mold. And every jar of peanut butter had the mold aspergillus in it, which gives off aflatoxin, and aflatoxin causes liver cancer. That was the cause of the children dying of liver cancer. The reason why the book's called The China Study is because the Emperor of China got cancer, and so he asked a survey to be done all through China. And they found that the Chinese living in the country, eating natural food, the cancer rates were very low. But they found in the city, where what Time magazine calls the Chinese are eating the meat sweet diet, high meat, high dairy, high sugar, high refined carbs. And the death rate was very high from cancer in the cities. In fact, Colin Campbell said with all his research, he could turn cancer cells on and off by the amount of meat and dairy products he was giving the rats. 20% animal protein, he could switch the cancer cells on. 5% animal protein, it didn't develop. 20% vegetable protein, the cancer didn't develop. So it was that meat sweet diet that was feeding it. So we once again get back to, it's not the microbe, it's the condition of the body. As in the illustration of Sick Steve and Healthy Harry. If you give your body the right conditions, it's been designed to heal. If it's not healing, you've got to go back and put your detective hat on and find out why isn't it healing. Am I still having exposure to toxins? Am I still having exposure to environmental poisons? Am I still having exposure to mold? How does mold get into the body? It can get into the body through inhalation. It can get into the body through the skin. Never touch any moldy food. It'll go through the skin. We can ingest it. If you've got nice strong hydrochloric acid, it mightn't hurt you, but not many people have that. And if you've got good gut flora, remember you've got the protection down there, but not a lot of people have got that. It can also be sexually transmitted. And if you look in a medical dictionary at myco is another name for mold. There's page after page after page of diseases that start with myco. I've got a book at home. In fact, I've got a lot of books at home, and I quote them in my book, so you don't have to buy all those books because I've quoted all the good bits in my book. And it's called The Study of Mycology. The study of mycology is the study of fungus. I've asked med students, I said, how much do you study in mycology? They said, we don't. They study bacteriology, but they don't study mycology, which is the fungus. Why not? Because a lot of the medications are putting it into your body, antibiotics. All your statin drugs are made from a mycotoxin. Your statin drugs are made from mycotoxins. And so these drugs are feeding it in the body. Do you remember when doctors used to look at your tongue? Because the tongue should be pink from the tip to the back. And if there's a white back coating that can't be scraped off, they're little fungus buds. So now we've seen how it gets into the body. How do you get it out? That's the $1 million question. How do we get it out of the body? We get it out of the body by starving it. What's its favourite food? Sugar. Yeasts. Sugars and yeasts. So in my book there's a program called the Antifungal Stage 1. And the Antifungal Stage 1 is a program, a dietary program to go on to stop feeding the fungus and kill. I do think we've got to get away from the kill mentality, but the good news is there are herbs that will kill fungus and won't kill you. In Psalm 104 verse 14 the Bible says that God gave herbs for the service of man. Garlic's a good one. Olive leaf extract's another great antifungal herb. Grapefruit seed extract, that's strong antifungal. Oregano essential oil. Now with all these herbs, it is an idea to alternate. Because the body does get used to things, as we know. So you might do 2 weeks on one, 2 weeks on another, 2 weeks on another. And restore the balance. Flood the gastrointestinal tract with the good guys, the good bacteria, like in your cultured foods. And alkalize. The most alkalizing foods are your vegetables, especially your dark green leafies. They're very alkalizing. Is it that simple? It is. Aren't you glad it's that simple? Are there any questions? Yes. So the question is, eating grapefruit with the seed? Yep. If you think grapefruit's bitter, just bite the seed and you'll think the grapefruit's sweet. Because the seed is very, very bitter. But that's cheap medicine. Eat a grapefruit every day and chomp on a few seeds.
Okay, I have a question because you have myco there. So do we still eat mushroom? What about nutritional yeast?
We don't use nutritional yeast at all. I don't use it at all. It's not in my pantry, and we do not use it at all at our health retreat. And the reason is that we find a lot of people that come to our retreat have either major or minor fungal problems in their body, or yeast, or yeast manifestations, or cancer. So when we look at cancer, you'll see that there certainly is a link between cancer and fungus. So we don't use them at all. What about mushrooms? If someone doesn't have a yeast problem in their body, to have a meal of mushrooms occasionally is not a big deal, but if they do have a yeast presence, they are best to eliminate them until they conquer it. There's some hands here.
You spoke about germs don't cause disease. They are the result, is that what you said?
They're the result of unhealthful conditions.
Of unhealthful conditions.
Either in the house or in the body.
Okay. I just mentally, because I've always thought of germs as causing the problem.
That's right.
My brain is having a hard time.
That's right.
Digesting that.
That's right, and that I appreciate that very much. But you think about it. The pharmaceutical company was founded on this theory that germs cause disease. So they've come across all these drugs to kill that terrible germ. Can you see why no one liked Antoine Beauchamp's theory? Everyone, because Antoine Beauchamp's theory is putting the problem back on us. Whereas Pasteur said, you poor thing, it's not your fault. keep drinking and smoking and going to bed at midnight and eating whatever you want and just take this drug to kill the germ. Can you see that? I'm making it very simple. But many are sick through ignorance, granted. That's why I believe the only hope of better things is educating people in the right principles. And it was a big thing for my brain to get around because I'm a trained nurse. And we're trained that these germs are bad. But actually, when you stand back and you consider it, it doesn't make sense. Yes?
So I know someone who over a period of 3.5, 4 years had a lot of oral reconstruction done. So every time a surgery was done, they were put on antibiotics as a precaution. And now are clearly having fungal issues.
Yeah.
So would your antifungal protocol in your book address?
Absolutely.
That would be a good place to do that.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep.
Thank
It's I believe it's wrong for someone to be made to have that many, and so often the antibiotics are given just in case.
Exactly.
And there is no need.
Thank you.
Barbara, and our whole Western allopathic medical system is based on that one germ
That's
per
right.
one disease. So the
That's
pharmaceutical companies get to sell a lot of vaccines and a lot of drugs
That's right.
to
That's
attack
right.
each individual germ.
That's right.
Are you going to be discussing the benefits of the liver gallbladder flush in a later talk?
Yeah, I think we'll be discussing that a little bit when we look at the gastrointestinal tract, which is
On
we've
Friday.
got improving digestion at 4 o'clock on Thursday, and then the colon is on Friday.
Okay.
What's your advice on probiotics? To take probiotics?
On probiotics, I think if someone's been on a course of antibiotics, a course of probiotics is important, but it's important to get a plant-based one. It is also important to take them 3/4 of an hour before breakfast so that they go down to the colon. And usually, if someone's been on a course of antibiotics, they need to be on the probiotic for at least a month and then go on to the probiotic foods every day. The probiotic foods being the sauerkraut, the yogurts, the kefirs, the misos.
I'm talking about the pills, supplements, probiotics.
Pardon?
Probiotic supplements.
Yeah, that's what I talked
Okay,
about.
okay.
Yeah.
And there also are some mushrooms in the natural stores. For example, chaga mushroom. It's in the form of tea. Also, you can buy the powder, and it's very much advertised as fighting cancer. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't use that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
What would be some of the causes of acne?
A bad diet can certainly contribute to it. It's also inherited. There can be an inherited factor, but often it's a hormonal factor because the acne begins around puberty when the hormones change. So balancing the hormones can help to eliminate the acne.
What about rosacea?
Rosacea is an allergy, and when you stop the 5 common allergens we talked about this morning, which is peanuts, dairy, wheat, oats and refined sugar, within a couple of months the rosacea usually eases.
You talked about nutritional yeast. What about yeast in bread?
We don't use yeast in bread. We don't use any yeast at all. So what we do to make bread is use the sourdough. The sourdough culture does have some wild yeast, but it has lactobacillus in it. Now the wild yeast cause the rising of the bread, whereas the lactobacillus consumes the waste from the wild yeasts. So it's a totally different product. Sourdough culture to make bread. And yeast bread was only used since the Industrial Revolution. Before that, all bread was the sourdough method. Depends. Though that bread that we had at lunchtime, that is totally gluten-free. And I know Tristan, he uses a bit of psyllium to bind. He uses teff, which is, I think, an African flower. So there's a variety of flowers. At home, the only flour I use to bake with, and because I'm not home much, I don't make the sourdough bread, but I do make my husband apple pie every week, which he very much likes. And I use half white spelt, half wholemeal spelt. So spelt is the only flour I use at home in my baking.
I have a question about the hot and cold treatment. So if you don't have easy access to water, can you use like a heating pad and a cold pack?
Yeah, it's not as effective. It's not as effective. It's far more effective, the immersion in the hot and cold. But you can try that if you've nothing else.
I heard the doctor say about the bread, if you put in the freezer, then you take it out from the freezer and you toast, it doesn't have any more, the effect of the yeast is gone.
Yes, but it's almost impossible to kill yeast. That's one of its problems. There's one up the back.
I did not understand the question, couldn't quite hear exactly what the last lady said. Can you repeat the question and your answer again?
The question was, she said the doctor told her that if you put yeast bread in the freezer and you defrost it the next day and toast it, there's no active yeast left. But personally, I don't use yeast at all. And we don't use it at all in our retreat. We use the sourdough. So when you use the sourdough method to bake bread, which was how bread was always traditionally made, the sourdough process breaks down the protein or the gluten in the bread, so it basically pre-digests your grain for you. So it's a lot easier to digest that bread. So it's a much superior way to make bread. Comments on psyllium?
What are your thoughts about psyllium?
Psyllium's the seed from the plantain plant, that weed, so there's nothing wrong with psyllium.
Instead of yeast, to use psyllium?
Well, it doesn't rise the bread, and it doesn't break down the grain like the sourdough culture does. So it's really an unleavened bread, the psyllium, if you put psyllium in. Psyllium acts as a binder. Yeah?
So you're speaking of sourdough bread. So the sourdough bread we have in the store, is that basically the same even though it has white wheat flour in it?
Well, sourdough is just a method of raising the bread. So you can have sourdough wheat, sourdough rye, sourdough spelt, sourdough gluten-free. The sourdough is just the way the bread is risen, and you can make it with any flour.
Okay, so you recommend the spelt?
I do.
Okay.
Because the spelt is
Thank you.
probably one of the closest wheats to the original wheat. One up the back.
Oregano. What herbs did you say again? You said
Now,
grapefruit.
the good news is that the herbs to kill fungus are listed in my book, Self-Heal by Design. And garlic is one, olive leaf extract is one, grapefruit seed extract. You can buy that as grapeseed. No, it's called Traveller's Friend. Well, it is in Australia. In Australia, they're not allowed to call it grapefruit seed extract for some reason, but I think here it can be called grapefruit seed extract. Also, oregano essential oil, that's another very strong antifungal, but because it's an essential oil, you have to be cautious, starting with only 1 drop in a little bit of water to begin with.
By your experience, how long it will take to get rid of mold from your system using these products?
That's a good question. How long will it take to eliminate fungus out of the body? Well, I'm afraid, again, we're back to the how long is a piece of string. One young girl was able to eliminate within 6 weeks. Another woman who I met in her 50s, she'd battled it for 30 years. It took 18 months, but after 18 months she was free of it. What I find is when it has had a manifestation in the body, you can do all this and it will certainly conquer it mostly, but I find that you ever have to have your eye on it. So if you can manage it, you're doing well. And everyone I know is managing something. And if you're looking for a total cure, then you'll see it when you see that little cloud coming in the heavens and Jesus comes again.
Amen.
And we're given new bodies. We look forward to that day. But until then, I thank God that there are simple ways we can manage the little bits and pieces that we all have. Well, I just want to congratulate you that you're all still awake after being sitting here for a couple of hours. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And if you could please bow your heads with me, we'll say a closing prayer. Father, thank you so much that we can be here. I pray for your heavenly blessing on the travellers as they travel back to their houses, and may we all have a great night's sleep and a great morning exercise ready for class tomorrow. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Now I'll just recap what tomorrow is. So the first meeting tomorrow is Fantastic Fats. Then at 3 o'clock we're looking at diabetes and weight loss, and then at 4 o'clock we're looking at natural treatments. So looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Okay.
Question, but I need to tell you a little story. When I was about 12 or 13 years old, I had a little brother that